What is going on, Panthers Nation? Carolina Dad here, your host of the Two Growls, One Roar podcast. Hey, what a busy week it has been. And folks, I'm trying something new, as you can see, progressively trying to get better with this show. I tried to go live, and I went live for like 1 minute and had to take it down because I was having some issues on my end. But I tell you, it's just a different experience going live to record a podcast versus going live and just talking. And I think what I've realized is like my podcast recordings and content generation that I do here should be like its own thing that I do off the air, because the train of thought that I have to have like going into that is just different than me sitting back and trying to do something like freestyling. And so I just learned that very quickly as I was in there. But anyways, we are here to talk about the Panthers, and it's been a busy week. I've got 5 wide receiver draft profiles available, a ton of other videos out there, all on YouTube that you can watch. But this is the normal podcast episode, folks. So welcome in. I hope you like the new camera setup. It moves around with me. Pretty cool. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. I've got the new background so you can see that as far as like what's around me when I'm recording this. But anyways, busy week for the Panthers. And let's just say the Panthers have been the butt of a few jokes. One big joke there at the NFL Honor Society, as the joke that came about was that Taylor Swift was all the way in Japan, but the furthest thing from a Super Bowl was the Carolina Panthers. And we have Dave Canales on X taking that quote, tweet, whatever it was, Mike K put it out there, and making a little note as he's keeping a receipt. And I like it. That's one of the things I like about having Canales active on X. And he's been more than active this week because he's had quite a few interviews. WFNZ, I heard him on there. I heard him on the Fan Upstate. I heard him, I believe, on the Roar podcast, not on the podcast itself, but there, Fox 99 something out of Charlotte. So it's a busy week for him. Dan Morgan went on WFNZ. So we got to hear from all these guys. I heard a few different things throughout, but the one thing that was the same every time that I heard Canales talk was this idea of alignment. And I know I kind of joked that, hey, the days of collaboration and this collaborative talk are over, which they are, but now we can focus our ideas on alignment. And I think that's okay. That's going to be the new initiative as we get aligned as a team, as an organization, as changes continue to flow in. And let me pull this up because it just happened. Actually, I can't pull it up because I don't have the tweet right in front of me. I do over here, though. So give me 1 second. Because we had some semi-breaking news this morning coming out of Carolina as things are kind of shaking out. And I'll pull it up for you if I can get it. I'll pull it up for myself. You won't be able to see it here. But according to ESPN's Seth Walder, the team is expected to part ways with Taylor Rajak, the franchise's first ever director of football analytics. Rajak has served in the role since 2019 when owner David Tepper introduced the football analytics department. So continuing to see changes in the front office and the operations side. I don't know who is going to be in position to fill that role, but hey, busy week. And as we talk about a busy week, and I'm going to dissect more about what I heard from Canales in just a little bit, but let's talk about the news, the staff. The staff is slowly coming together. And the first thing that happened was the announcement of Brad Idzik as the new offensive coordinator. Now, I did kind of a mini preview session of him the last time I did, coaching hires, when we hired quite a few folks on the offensive staff. Again, he started out as a coach at Stanford, as a graduate assistant from 14 to 18. Then jumped to Seattle from 19 to 20 as an assistant wide receivers coach, so very, close to Canales. Assistant quarterbacks coach and offensive quality control coach in 21. Assistant wide receivers coach in 22. Jumped to the wide receivers coach with the Bucs in 23. And then offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers now. And again, he's not going to be calling the plays. We are still looking for a few pieces of the staff, quarterback, tight end, possibly passing game coordinator to be filled. But the staff is coming together. And local kid out of Durham, North Carolina, played at Wake Forest, been around the block, so I'm sure he's glad to be home. But that wasn't the only hire. We also announced the hire of Tracy Smith as the new special teams coordinator. Tracy Smith most recently worked as an assistant special teams coach for the Seahawks. Again, he was another name as we went through this process that I said he's got ties to Canales. He was a name that was brought up and likely going to come in. 15 years of NFL experience working with the Cleveland Browns, San Francisco 49ers, and at the time it was the Oakland Raiders and then Houston Texans. He served as a special teams coordinator. So he's wide range of special teams, and when we look at, replacing Chris Tabor, I think it's a great hire. And again, it builds that continuity and alignment that we are talking about. So slowly but surely, the staff is coming together and being finalized in Carolina. Now, the other news was the official announcement that Ejiro Evero is going to be back in Carolina. I know Canales is excited. I hope that the defensive side of the ball is excited. This is fantastic news for us and Canales as he can now really focus on the offense, because bringing in a whole new set of coaches and staff on the defensive side of the ball as well as offensive side of the ball could be quite a nightmare for a new coach. Gives us a little bit of a head start as well. So if you go back and look at the offseason calendar, coaches or teams that hired a new coach this offseason have the ability to start 2 weeks earlier than coaches that retain their head coach. So in this case, Panthers are going to be able to start their offseason workout program on April 1st compared to other teams that retain their coach April 14th or 15th. I think it's 2 weeks right after that. So kind of an upside, and it's upside on the defensive side of the ball because it's not like there's going to be that much newness that we have to do. Again, bringing in some free agents more than likely, but still being able to have that while Canales turns his attention to the offense is something that at least gets me a little bit excited. And I think it helps with some of the negotiations. When we talk about the report that's coming out that the Panthers want to retain Frankie Louvu, that's a no-brainer. Who doesn't want Frankie Louvu? So Frankie Louvu on deck, hopefully to come back. We'll see. And Brian Burns. And I've talked extensively about Brian Burns. We're about to emerge into the franchise tag period where he could get the franchise tag. That's assuming that a deal is not worked out. And I wasn't planning on kind of going down this tangent. I'm going to do it in another session. But we also talk about some decisions that have to be made with the roster coming up, and that is, one, Derek Brown. We've already exercised the fifth-year option, but is there a way to get a contract in place for him? And then J.C. Horn. So we've got to decide if we want to give J.C. Horn his fifth-year option. I personally am a fan of it. I know about the injury history, but it makes sense to me to give him an additional year to prove it. And if things don't work out, they don't work out. And it's not like $11 million is that expensive, especially as you look at the upside. It could be a gamble one way or the other, but in my opinion, it's the right move to make. And I would put my money in the pot of betting on J.C. Horn versus not. And I know some fans are going to say, why? Why would you want to do that? But I think there is a lot of upside. And for me, I'm like, hey, let's just do this, see if it works out, because I think it can. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. You get burned, and it's not that much money. It is a lot of money, but it's not that much considering that this year the highest paid cornerback on the team right now is Asante Jackson with $16 million or so. So I talked about NFL honors, and I talked about being the butt of the joke. One of the big announcements that came out of NFL honors was Julius Peppers being inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Congratulations to Julius Peppers. One local native, North Carolina native, played at the University of North Carolina, selected by the Panthers. We know his story. We know about him leaving, going to Chicago, going to Green Bay, then coming back. But he was like a first ballot, no-brainer. I didn't think there would be any way that he would not get in the first time. He is the first player that the Panthers have drafted, the first player the Panthers have drafted to make it into the Hall of Fame, which is quite an accomplishment, at least in my mind. And, coming up, we're going to have a few other guys on this list, some Panthers names that you're going to know next year. One name that's going to be available is Luke Kuechly. Luke Kuechly, and I think Luke gets in, but I don't think he's going to get in this first time around. I don't think he's going to be a first ballot. There's no doubt in my mind that he's one of the greatest linebackers to ever play. But I think when you look at how the Hall of Fame works, where there's kind of this staggering of, well, you got a few guys in front of you, this one's got to get over this one. The fact that Patrick Willis got in is significant help for Luke in making the case for him to get in. It's just not going to be next year. I think there's a few other folks in front of him, but that class also includes Marshawn Lynch, Eli Manning, Clay Matthews, Darren Sproles, Joe Staley, Terrell Suggs, Earl Thomas, Marshall Yanda and Adam Vinatieri, kicker. As you could see, I don't know if Adam gets in first ballot, but I think eventually he should be able to get in. And I believe Ryan Khalil is also on this list, if I go back and recall correctly. So quite a list. And then you also think about the folks that are still sitting out that have not made it in. Steve Smith. I know a lot of Panthers fans want Steve Smith making it in, and I think he will. You know, you look at Devin Hester getting in. Again, I feel like it's just a log jam right now. And so for me, and I've heard folks talk about it, the frustrating thing about Steve Smith not getting in, it's one, not to get in, but for him not even to be a finalist, because, you know, you look at the group of finalists, and I know you whittle it down, but I think he should be in the finalist group. And I'm not saying it's like off the charts, clear number one. He should have been a first ballot, but I do think he will eventually get there. And the other thing that people are starting to talk about is this Mount Rushmore for the Carolina Panthers, and who would you put on your Mount Rushmore? I think you can make a case for a lot of folks. Julius Peppers has to be on there. Steve Smith has to be on there. I think a lot of people would say Cam Newton has to be on there. Luke Kuechly could be. And then you start getting into the tier, well, what about Jake Delhomme? What about Thomas Davis, Greg Olsen? I mean, the list goes on and on. But if you're talking about the 4 top Panthers of all time, at least it is as it is today, it's tough. It's tough to pick out that 4, but I think hands down you can say Julius Peppers, Steve Smith, 2 out of 4, 50% of that Mount Rushmore. And I'll let y'all decide on the others, because I'm not going to do it today. I'm not going to debate it and go through it, but I would love to hear what people think. And so, yeah, who's going to be next? Who will be the next Panther? Do you think it's going to be Steve Smith, or is it going to be Luke Kuechly? Is it going to be someone else? Maybe. I know some fans are like, Luke's going to get in. I just don't think he's going to be a first ballot. But you could have Steve Smith getting in next year. Still hard, though, when he hasn't even been a finalist yet. But you could. Steve Smith and then Luke, maybe the next year. You could have 3 years in a row with Panthers drafted players getting into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And a young franchise, man, like very young franchise. I know we've had other players like Sam Mills associated with the team. I know he's all about the mantra and founded Keep Pounding. We're, primarily focused talking about players that the Panthers drafted, developed, and were able to get into the Hall of Fame. Now let's talk about the Canales interview that we had this week. And he had a few interviews. One of them that I tuned into was probably like a 12, 13-minute interview with WFNZ, again, sports radio out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And he talked a little bit about his thoughts and why he wanted to come to Carolina. And a lot of it had to do with Bryce Young. And this is a quote from that episode. I look at Bryce Young. In Seattle, we were never anywhere close to getting that first overall pick. We had some success. We were in the playoffs, so we were always in the high 20s in the first round. So to have an opportunity to be part of the development of a player like this is just an unbelievable chance for me. One of the other big questions surrounded his second-year quarterback was how do they fix or help Bryce Young? And he said, my approach with Bryce doesn't feel like a fix-it project at all. What I see is an accurate passer, a guy who's got courage in the pocket, a guy who pops back up and just keeps rocking. He's just built and wired that way for me. It's no different from any other quarterbacks. And I fully, agree with that because he has had quite a year, right? Getting banged around, getting sacked as much as he did, still getting back up. I know there was that time in the Jacksonville game where you were a little bit worried, but overall, he's bounced back. And now it's time for Canales to figure it out, get things aligned, and show us what we've got. And when we talk about the blueprint to how this is going to happen on the offensive side of the ball, the most eye-opening thing of this entire week was the interview with Fox, and again, 99.7, I believe it is. Sorry, I don't know the call signal. But there in Charlotte. And it was with Ellis, and they were talking of the War podcast. And it was about a 5-minute interview, really just talking through his overview and philosophy of the team. And what was brought up, and I should say now that I'm like rambling on this, it was the upstate, so I apologize. This was Mark Ryan, the upstate. My interviews are rolling together. So look up Mark Ryan, upstate, sports radio, you'll find it. But his interview Mark had a really great interview, and I follow him on X. He follows, and the interview with him, he asked some hard-hitting questions as well. And that was the thing that I liked about all these interviews. Our guys, like our radio folks, did not shy away from why did you come here? What do you think about Tepper? What do you think about the meddling? Things like that. So I would recommend going out and listening as much as possible. But we heard that. And a question got brought up from Mark, and he said, what do you think about this roster? Kind of phrasing how do you plan on helping Bryce and building this out? What are the positives that you see today? And he kind of didn't even hint at the roster being what it should be and said, well, there's some free agents and there's some guys that we have our eyes on. I mean, glazed right over the idea of even looking at what was here today, which says a lot. And I'm getting ready to do a full series on the Carolina Panthers roster, and it's going to include the offense, defense, special teams is easy. But that's coming up this week. So I'm going to be showing you who's here today and then taking a look at some potential free agents as we come about. But it sounds like that's the move, and I don't know if that means we get to land the Mike Evans, the T. Higgins, the whoever you want. But it gives me a little bit of hope that, hey, maybe we are actually out here and we're going to turn into a serious football team that's at least trying to go out and get the guys that we need to win. Part of that's going to be Dan Morgan. Part of that's going to be Brant Tillis and the structuring of how this roster is going to look. But it does give me a little bit of excitement, folks, a little bit of excitement that maybe, just maybe, things are going to get right. All right, folks, that's all I got for today. Going to have more content coming out later this week, like I said, so just follow and subscribe on YouTube if you want to stay connected. If there's something else that I missed that you want me to talk about, let me know. Anyways, y'all have a good one. See ya.